Welcome to the Speakers Forum. You found yourself in the right place. Your fear of missing out is over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the scene a little bit for this session, and then I'll introduce Karim and I, and we're really, really interested in questions. So do keep your thinking caps on, because I want this to be as interactive as possible. So the kind of fundamental kind of underpinning of this session is that, as well as the importance of us understanding what the people of Grenfell experienced and continue to experience, it's really important for us to learn from that experience when we start to think about emergency preparedness. So this is a predominantly climate change space, and we are tipping into the climate impacts era. So some of the things that happened at Grenfell have real relevance for our preparedness for climate change. So that's the kind of setting for this. But it is totally within the confines of this space to also just talk about Grenfell. So if you have questions about Grenfell, that's also really welcome. But I'm going to keep us tipping back to what happened to that community, how they were able to help themselves, and what that was like, what that experience was like. So we're going to chat for a little bit, Karim and I, and then we're going to open the space up to questions. If there's anyone under 15 and they want to ask a question, they can put their hand up straight away. Okay, so as soon as you think of a question, if you're under 15, put your hand up. Okay, great. So I'm really glad. I spend a lot of time at the moment dragging Karim around the country. I'm really sorry, mate.
Happy to.
He's really happy to be here because he's a generous soul. So welcome, Karim. I'm really glad that you're here. So Karim is the chair of Grenfell United. And I think you were from the beginning. Is that right?
Vice chair.
Vice chair. Do beg your pardon. Okay. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself? And then I'll talk about myself, and then we'll do some questions.
Okay, sure. So hi, everybody. Really, really grateful and happy to be here. My name's Karim. I'm the vice chair of Grenfell United. I have been since 2018. Grenfell United is an organisation that was created by the bereaved and survivors almost immediately after the fire, as a group to sort of come together and help each other out when it came to sort of getting accommodation, getting IDs, getting whatever the family needed at the time, to now sort of evolve to a campaign group. My uncle, who passed away in a tower, lived on the top floor. He was a disabled man. He had problems walking. He called on the night several times and was told to stay put by the fire brigade, and unfortunately no one came to save him, and he lost his life in his flat, and that's where he was found. And ever since then, myself and others who lost families and lost their homes have come together and almost given everything, and when I say everything, I really do mean everything, into trying to bring about some type of change, whether it's change in regulations, change in the building industry, change in communities, and to also, most importantly, have some type of justice. Because at the moment, the way our families are being remembered is by this culture of corruption and greed and neglect, and we don't want that to be their legacy. We want some change to happen so that this never happens again. And also, these conversations are important, like Rebecca said, so we're more prepared when these disasters happen, because unfortunately, and I really hate to say this, but it's not a matter of if another Grenfell will happen. Excuse me. It's a matter of when. So that's my bit.
That's a really good scene set. Thank you. Okay, my name's Rebecca Gibbs. Some people know me as Bex, and I work predominantly now on climate impacts. So I've worked on climate change for about 20 years, and mostly on carbon reduction. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, I realised that very, very little is happening on climate preparedness. And so that's what I've decided to spend my time doing. And I do that in various different ways. One of which is the Cadence Roundtable, which if you want to know more about that, come and chat to me afterwards. Okay, so what I would love to do now is just to have a bit of a conversation with Karim, to just get a sense of this story. Like I say, if there's anyone under 15, you want to ask a question, put your hand up straight away. Otherwise, we'll have quite a lot of time for questions, probably about 20 minutes at the end. So let me open up this story. Karim, what I've been struck by when I've read about Grenfell is a whole range of things. And I know that many people here will be really struck by the story, the extraordinary, notable tragedy of the story, the preventability of the Grenfell disaster, which I think is a really important thing to keep in mind. But one of the things that's really stayed with me and has really piqued my curiosity, really, was the extent to which the community around Grenfell and residents within Grenfell started to organise themselves really quickly as the disaster was unfolding. So I wanted to invite you to say a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite extraordinary, really. But I mean, the more I look back at it, for me, this wasn't a surprise. I grew up in that area. The diversity, you know, the different cultures, religions, whatever you want to say. Like, this is just how we are. You know, a neighbor needed help. Someone was ill. We were all around. We were all helping. We were all involved. Everyone knew everything was happening. So when I look back and think about how our small community came together, like, for me, that didn't surprise me. It was almost expected. And everything they did was well, like I said, it was expected. But for me, it was more outside. The immediate time within the first few weeks, you know, the community was filled with so many people from all over. I was approached by people from all over the country that had come down for various different reasons, whether it's to give food or donate money or whatever it is. They were just there to help and stuck around. But also, you know, there were some really sort of crazy, dangerous things that were happening in that crowd. But we could probably talk about that later. But yeah, just to answer that, Bex, it was quite expected. My community's always been like that, you know. Yeah. And when certain areas were opened up for some of the families, you know, it was the police and everybody else that came outside that prevented things from happening in the right way. You know, even for me, like at that time, my uncle was still technically missing, right? So because we didn't know where he was, whether he escaped or whatever. So in the eyes of the law, he's technically missing. And I'm trying to get into these centres where some of the survivors have made it out to see if my uncle is in one of these places. And the treatment from the police, it was almost like they were told to be there to prevent something, not to help people. You know, they were there in their riot gear. They were there to sort of stop people from doing whatever it is that they thought. I mean, if you look at some of the stuff that's come out in the public inquiry, you know, comments like there was a lot of Muslims that passed away in the tower, so there's a high expectation of an uprising or a Muslim uprising, which was just ridiculous. And the police were there to put in place to sort of prevent anything like that from happening. They weren't there to help any of us, and that was something that was quite apparent, and for me, I picked up on quite quickly. And also the lack of any type of you know, authority figure from the council or the government or anything like that. The only people were really just the communities, and this is how we were finding out what was going on, through word of mouth, walking around the streets, hanging up posters. Oh, there's a meeting that a group of families are holding over here. Oh, the police are having a meeting over there and they can't reach out. So this is the only way that we found out what was going on and what was happening. And we knew it straight away that we were sort of left on our own to piece everything together and find our family members, or to try to, you know, help people find somewhere to sleep, because people were sleeping on the grass practically for days, you know, and in the sports centre in the community. So the community was great. The country was great. I expected it from my community, but there were things that were happening almost to sort of prevent things from happening, if that makes sense.
Do you want to unpack that a bit? That's a really interesting thing to say.
Well, I mean, look, at the time, you know, I just want to make it clear. Look, I've never been an activist. I didn't know this world existed. I lived in my bubble with my wife and my kids, and, you know, was involved in the rat race and all of that type of stuff. And even when I was experiencing the stuff I was going through at the time, I still was almost convincing myself that this stuff wasn't real. For example, the government had sent somebody into our community to start up a bereaved family group to rival our group. But very quickly our community picked up that, you know, there weren't things, certain things weren't right about this person. The flat number that he was claiming to be part of or lost family of didn't actually exist. The person he mentioned doesn't exist. And you can Google this. This is on Google. If you Google us or Grenfell United or Grenfell, it's there. It's been written about. The government sent people in to rival what we were doing. And even, even to this day, like, I'm still putting the pieces together and understanding why. And effectively, we were managed. They were worried that what happened to us was going to...
By they, you mean
the state. The
right?
state.
Yep.
The government,
Great,
the state, whatever you guys want to call them. There's loads of other names I use. But yeah, so they managed us. They were worried that, I don't know, a revolution or something like that was going to happen, or this was going to spark some type of revolution. And don't forget, this is the days where Jeremy Corbyn was coming up to be a prime minister, and there's all of this stuff going on. And even with Jeremy Corbyn, I'll say this, and my wife probably won't want me to say this, but he was instructed to stay away from us. I have different views on Jeremy Corbyn because my personal experiences with him has not been great, like borderline disrespectful. But this man was told to stay away from us by his spads, by whoever was close to him, stay away from Grenfell United for whatever reason. And had we have connected, had he have been our Andy Burnham, we'd probably been in a completely different place today. We've never had that. We've never had a politician like Andy has done for the people of Hillsborough, who we've stayed very well in touch with and taken lots of lessons from. We might have been in a different place. And I think that's what they were worried about. Our connection or connecting with him and creating some type of uprising or whatever. And that's what, and the state managed that. And, you're talking about, apart from Ed Defan, who is experienced in activism. Ed Defan is the guy who predicted the fire in the Grenfell blog. None of us had been involved in this world, so we don't know what's happening when it's happening, And like I said, even to this day, I'm still putting the pieces together, and being around people like Loki and stuff like that, learning different things, and the Spy Cops inquiry is happening at the moment. I don't know if you guys have seen some crazy stuff that's come out today. So all of this stuff for me was a world that I thought only existed in movies, and now that I think back, it was so blatant. Now you say that, we've come together as a people because we're trying to prepare ourselves for disaster, for climate change, all of that type of stuff, and I am a massive believer in that. But what we need to understand is they already have a plan for every disaster, for everything. The hashtags are already waiting to be used. The yellow ribbons are ready to be put up in different communities. They are ready and have a playbook for when these type of things happen, because they know that they happen, and sometimes they are the ones that cause it. So we need to be definitely have these type of spaces and talk about these things and share our lessons, because these guys, the state, the government, the corporations that are involved in this type of things, they have all the time and money in the world, and they won't quit until we're tired. But things like this are important because at the end of the day, we as a people are more stronger than they are if we come together.
Yeah, man. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Karim, we have a lot to learn from your experience. I'm sorry that we are making you talk about that experience. So there's a couple of things I want to say just to set a broader scene on what Karim's sharing. So one of the things that we know from disaster preparedness kind of data and the kind of peer-reviewed data is what Karim is describing is really typical. So one of the things that happens is that when there's a disaster, human beings do not flee from the site of disaster. They actually gather around the locus of the problem and they support one another. Now, there's a couple of things to understand about that. The first is that we are exceptionally good at cooperating. We're really, really good as a species at cooperating, but we don't do it for very long. We struggle to do it well for a long time. So this is one of the things that we need to understand about ourselves. The second thing is, and this is really to kind of validate in some senses what Karim's experience is as a generalizable experience. If we look at, say, Rebecca Solnit, who some may know, who's written in The Guardian and is a commentator from the States, she wrote a book called Paradise Built in Hell, and I really urge you to check this book out. Paradise Built in Hell looks at disasters like Grenfell over the last century and finds a very common experience with this experience, that the strategic authorities who should be providing resourcing and should be supporting communities are in fact often doing the exact opposite. And it's really important that we understand that that can happen for all sorts of valid and not very valid reasons. So in this case, as you said, there was a fear of rioting, there was a fear that that the community would become a problem. And this is one of the things that is really a common experience, that the community that needs support are perceived as the problem. That is a very well documented issue. So I'm really glad that you're testifying to that. There's one more thing I would like to say. But no, actually, perhaps I'll can that, because one of the things I would love to do just before we go to questions, we've got about a quarter of an hour before we go to questions. I'd love you, Karim, if you don't mind, to just unpack some of the challenges in a little bit more detail to help us understand. So the people that should have supported you, that you thought would be on your side in a disaster, so you knew that your community would be there for you and for others. You were surprised by the generosity that came from outside, from other kind of ground level folk, let's say. But it didn't feel like the strategic authorities that should have helped were on your side. Do you want to say a little bit more about that, what it was like, whether there are any anecdotes that would help illustrate that point?
Sure. I mean, so like I mentioned before, my uncle was technically missing until his body was identified by the police, I guess, or the coroner's forensic staff. And we had a couple of police officers that were family liaison officers, and they were the ones that would be in contact with us in terms of what the process was, how long we had before we knew where my uncle was, and when we could have him back, and when we could lay him to rest. And I mean, just that within itself, I'll just say, so obviously Grenfell happened in the 14th of June 2017. We laid my uncle to rest end of September. So it took that long to not only identify him, but get him back. And the only way that I understood and was well informed of what was going on is through my friend who also lost family members, was in communication with a lot of other people that lost family members. And a lot of the people who lost their lives were in the top floor. And that's where they fled, and they went into flats, and some were together, some were alone. And we knew, so he was in contact with everyone, and we knew, right, this family's just been told that this flat has just been searched on the top floor. So we knew that that flat was 2 flats away, so that means it's 2 or 3 weeks. And so we started piecing it together through communicating with ourselves. There wasn't really sort of anyone, and the police, whenever you'd ask them something, they never really shared information. It just felt like this massive scramble for us to sort of get any sort of information. I mean, my wife, who's here today, she had to fight with our lawyers, throughout this process. And these were people who we thought would also be on our side, right? They're there to help us and represent us. But there was a lot of fighting between her and them in terms of getting my uncle back, and the police. There's never, and I'm not one to say, I don't have any problem with the police, but I can only be honest. From the beginning to up until today, they have been like awful. And they might say, oh, we've met with you guys and we've kept you informed, but that for me doesn't mean anything. Every time, when you meet with us every time and you tell us the same stuff, that doesn't mean anything. When the police tell you that they've not actually gone and seized any evidence themselves, what sort of confidence are you supposed to have in them in delivering justice? But if I was to commit a crime today, they're coming to my house, they're taking my stuff, they're interviewing everyone, my bank accounts are all frozen, all of that type of thing. But with them, no, it's a gentleman's agreement that they have with the killers and the corporations to hand over any incriminating evidence, and they want us to be confident in them delivering us justice. And then the local authority, we knew from day one, Bex, that they were the ones that were in charge to look after these people's safety. They were the ones in charge to look after the residents when they were talking about concerns about fire safety or any type of safety in their homes. They never listened. They labelled them as troublemakers and rebel residents, and that's really where it started. But ultimately, the systematic processes that we have in this country, and whether you can blame it on the Tories or blame it on, it doesn't matter. They're all at fault. They were all part of the the system that we're in today, and I've used this line before, and I keep using it because for me it's just the easiest way to explain it. The system isn't broken; they've built it this way. It's built specifically like this so that they can, when they kill our families, there's ways that they can get around it. I don't know how else to
No, I understand what you're saying.
Sorry.
So no, please don't apologise. We're really grateful to hear what you have to say. The phrase that came into my head actually as you were speaking is the notion of public service and public servant. And this is an old-fashioned phrase, but it's a really interesting idea that the local authority did not perceive themselves to be servants of the public.
Definitely
there.
not.
And it doesn't sound like any other of the strategic authorities felt that they were in your service. One of the things that I just thought I would drop into this, because I think it isn't, this is not a radical point of view or a radical perspective about Grenfell. So one of the people in my world, Lucy Easthope, is a professional emergency preparedness person who has attended just about everything you can imagine. She's written a really, really accessible book. If you're interested in emergency preparedness, you do well to read it. And it's called When the Dust Settles, and it's called Searching for Hope After Disaster. Now, if you read this, you'll discover that Lucy is not a radical. She's not like a lot of people in this tent. She's an ordinary person who takes her work really, really seriously. But the chapter on Grenfell is really, really sobering reading. And she talks about things like the community being kept busy, in order that they would be taken out and not be able to fight for justice. So there were all sorts of relentless consultations going on. She talks about those. She talks about the victims being perceived as threats. She mentions the rioting worry. And generally very much supports your point of view, Karim. So I just thought I would drop that in because this is not... A lot of what we're talking about here sounds kind of crackers, really, but it's not. It's pretty mainstream experience. I suppose my final question to you, Karim, but other questions will come up from the audience. I wonder what you would like the people here to know. What would you have liked to have known before this happened? And what would you like people here to understand about how to work in a disaster?
Okay, wow, those are really good questions. Just to say before, we actually met with Lucy straight after she wrote her book, and she gave us some time. I mean, I just find it just crazy how she's been able to write this book, and it just says all of these blatant things, which I promise you, I am not into conspiracy theories or any of that radical, like, this is stuff that I've learned and seen and touched and felt and tasted. Like, I have lived it. And then Lucy's come along, written this book, it's blown our heads away, and I still don't understand how it's not gotten as much noise as it should have. And how come no one's like really sort of gone after her? I mean, I don't know. I haven't spoken to her since, but meeting with her and her saying to us, listen, you know, they kept you busy. Meetings after meetings, and people that said that they were with certain families and resistant groups or whatever you want to call it were actually, you know, people that were working for the government. She said that to us. But look, I think, you know, seven and a bit years on now after Grenfell, and it's gotten to a point. Obviously, you know, people like yourselves who are here right now are interested in listening about what's going on. You know, this isn't directed at, but it feels like people just want us to move on. People just want us. Right, it's great. Like, they've been paid out or whatever it is. Like, just knock the building down. We don't want to see it anymore. You know, get over it. And you know, I'll be honest. Sometimes, especially with what's happening in Palestine, I sometimes feel bad about speaking about Grenfell. Like, look at what's happening out there. Right. You know, and you know, we've all seen horrific things every day. Like, literally every single day. And the feeling of powerlessness, you know, at least with Grenfell, there's small things we can do. With Palestine, I don't even know if you want to donate money, I don't know who to trust. I don't know if these charities are doing the right thing. I don't know. I work with Loki and I trust him. I trust what he does. So I sometimes feel bad, Bex, you know.
No, I understand. But I think we have a lot to lose by not focusing very clearly on a pursuit for justice in Grenfell.
Absolutely.
That affects extraordinarily what will come next.
And that leads on to my point. Is my message to people would be like, I'd like people to see themselves in us. You know, Grenfell could have happened anywhere. You know, like, we still campaign for it. We don't live in these type of buildings anymore. The national scandal that Grenfell uncovered, the amount of people that are affected by these dangerous materials, this systematic sort of lobbying and corruption and greed, like, this stuff is alive and well, and Grenfell uncovered some of it, and it affects a lot more people than it did with us. And I just want people to see themselves in us, because whether it's a family member that is going off to uni and is staying in some type of accommodation that's cut with the stuff that's with the materials that's covered in it, or whether, you know, someone who lives in social housing and is just being treated like an absolute, like, even to this day, we have people saying to us, listen, this is not your house. You've got no right to complain or ask us for anything. Just be quiet. Be happy with what you got. And that's how people were treated in Grenfell. And some people were like, okay, yeah, I won't complain anymore. You know, and they got scared of being kicked out or evicted. But people need to see themselves in us. What Grenfell uncovered is a national thing, and we need to make sure that something like this not only doesn't happen again, but corporations, governments, politicians are held to account. Like, these people have continued to make ridiculous amounts of money since Grenfell, and, you know, we're here trying to get somebody arrested, or trying to find some form of justice, or change some type of legislation, at least get the materials down, or at least the people that have it across their buildings, you know, don't charge them for it, and them ended up, you know, taking their lives because they can't keep up with payments. Like, do something, you know. And there are so many different ways where you can. It's not just about, you know, for us, most importantly is justice for our 72, but also there's so many different things that we can do with looking at, like, our community, for example, and how did so many lessons that can be learned in how to come together and how to be strong. We don't need anybody to speak for us. We can speak for ourselves. You know, we don't need anybody to put any of these things in place. We can do them ourselves. And that eliminates outsiders coming in. You're more in control. You're more empowered in terms of what your people need. And that's what needs to be seen, is people need to look at Grenfell as, you know, this could have been any of us, but unfortunately, you know, the media coverage and, you know, people like, you know, Tommy Robinson and all of these other idiots, and calling Grenfell Falafel Tower and stuff like that, it just makes people not want to care. The same way as what they're doing in Palestine is making you believe that Palestinians are not humans. People in Grenfell were not humans.
That's a fairly important strategy,
you know?
Isn't it?
And it works, and we've got to stop that.
So I just want to draw out a couple of strands from what you've been saying. I think it's really interesting that what's striking me is that in the middle of extraordinary grief, I mean, it's hard to imagine grief that's playing out in public, to be both kind of bewildered by the lack of information that you're being given, and then the kind of subterfuge that was going on to kind of baffle and undermine the communities. It's hard for any of us to imagine what that must feel like. So I'm really grateful that you're sharing this. We haven't really talked about the inquiry, so we could talk about the inquiry, but what I want to do is just kick out the opportunity for questions into the audience. Is there anyone who's got a question straight away, wants to come in on anything? Yeah, please, Phil.
Yeah, just a really simple question. You talked about stooges basically being put in, and you said in one case to set up a rival tenants organisation or rival Grenfell United.
Yeah.
Did you ever find out who their employer was? I mean, is it police? Were they police, or who were they?
I believe it was the state.
I imagine, but I just, it's probably not MI5 or MI6, or, I mean, do you know, it was a national state?
I don't know. I don't know, if I'm being honest. I do know that there was an article written about it in The Guardian, but this is very, very early on. And this is one example. There are other examples, but I just don't feel like it's right to talk about just yet.
Oh, okay.
Karim, thanks for that. One thing that, I remember like when Grenfell happened, like a lot of Londoners, I woke up the next morning in shock, and part of that shock was I used to live in a tower block on the 13th floor, and a mate of mine rang me, he used to live there as well, and said, do you realise they had the same cladding on our block as they had on Grenfell? And I think a lot of us woke up with not only feeling horror for you, but feeling, oh my God, for the grace of God, that could have been us. Like you said, we immediately thought that could have been us.
Absolutely, yeah.
And And the other thing that struck me is I lived in that flat for 10 years, on the 13th floor. Never occurred to me what might happen if there was a fire in there. Never occurred. And then I started to think there is no way out, is there? They didn't build that stuff in. So that's one thing. I wonder, like, what you think about how we should be thinking about, like, the sort of stuff we're building that we end up living in. The other thing, I remember Daniel Renwick told me, and I didn't realise until he told me, that Grenfell was a retrofit. So we're all talking about retrofitting, like, our flats to sort of bring down carbon emission. Grenfell was retrofitted. That was what the cladding was. And even worse than that, was it the Byron Court fire? Years before that, when they tried that cladding out, 2 people died, loads of people injured. They knew this stuff didn't work and it killed people, and they still carried on using it. And loads of people must still be in this situation. And I remember he also said that they were a bit annoyed with Insulate Britain for using that term, because the company who put that cladding on, that was their slogan, Insulate Britain. So, I don't know, I'm not sure what the question is in the middle of this.
No, it's useful to have your thoughts, Sean. Sean, could you just say a little bit about the film? Because you did a film on Grenfell, didn't you? Is it available on the website?
I didn't, well, we did a couple of films on Grenfell. We did one film with the wrong people, definitely. Okay. And then we didn't promote it. But, like, we did another film, like, trying to connect all the different crises we're dealing with, and we brought Grenfell into that story because we thought it was important, which is called Everything Must Change, which is still going around. But yeah, I think it's around that. Like, when we're talking about resilience, etc., what do we do about retrofitting when we're not dealing with the fucking criminals we've got, so excuse my language, who are still putting this stuff on people's flats?
So is there anyone who wants to speak to retrofitting, and how people who are really concerned about retrofitting can make sure that they've got really high quality information?
Well, there are alternative insulation materials, particularly wood fibre board, which is natural.
And not particularly expensive, as I understand it. Is that right?
It's probably to do with economy of scale. It's probably more expensive than plastic-based substances, which are the nasty ones. So, yeah. I mean, it's all available. You know, it's probably more used in Europe, in Germany, particularly, and other countries. I'm not an expert, but I've used the stuff.
Okay, great. Anything else? Yeah, I just wondered whether you could talk about local homes and places like that.
Not so much about local homes, but I have used XPS, expanded polystyrene, which is basically what the Celotex and Kingspan and all those things is. And I think it is basically okay, Sean, so long as there's no air gaps. But in Grenfell, there's this air gaps, and there were no fire breaks, so you're getting a 60-metre run of flames. Get extraordinary temperatures. It's like a chimney. I mean, it was a furnace, So I think the material itself, although it should have failed the fire tests and was gamed through it, the real problem was the design of how it was put on, as I understand it from reading the interim report. But I'd be really interested to know what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not an expert either, but definitely not. But all of this is stuff that I've learned and things that have come out through the public inquiry. Yes, how they were put together, and this is the blame game that Celotex, Kingspan, Arconic are all playing. Arconic are saying, you fitted it incorrectly, our product is safe. He's saying the same thing, blah, blah, blah. But when we look at the details, we know that Kingspan almost falsified their tests with the 12mm magnesium oxides that they put in. We know that Arconic knew the dangers of their material, even quoting one of their employees saying, if 60 to 70 members or people die because of how flammable our cladding is, what is our responsibility? This is in the public inquiry. These are not my words. I'm not. These are not the exact. But this is what I've learned from the public inquiry. So we know that Kingspan played a massive role in falsifying their tests and also pressuring, I'm not sure who it was, whether it was BRE or RBS, whatever they're called, into the phrasing in the certificate for their material to be allowed. We knew that Arconic, the polyethylene that was in between the two sort of aluminium, that was liquid petrol. Arconic knew the dangers of it. But the thing is, and this is why I always bring it back to the state, they targeted our market because our rules were less, I don't know what the right word is here, strict.
Yeah, just less governance.
We're less strict.
Yeah.
And this is all from, we're talking deregulation from like Margaret Thatcher days, way back. So it's been a build up. And I wish the government just came out and said, look, we've messed it up. We've been building stuff really badly for decades. It's going to take a while to sort it out, but we're going to sort it out. But they've not said that. They've lied. They've hid. They've known since 2002. Again, this is a fact from the public inquiry. They've known since 2002 the dangers of flammable cladding on high-rise buildings. And then again, another thing. Sorry, Bex. I'll just
you've got plenty of time,
is
mate.
A guy called Brian Martin. I hate this man with a passion, who was in charge of approved document B. It's called, yes. And it's basically the document that they use to come up with the rules and legislation and what you should fit and how you should fit it. And when we're talking about where did 13 meters come from, where did this number come from in order for a building to be considered as high rise? And his answer was almost like, oh, we just made it up. We brought it out of nowhere. If you watch his video, which is online, it's almost like him trying to be Ricky Gervais, giving some type of skit in Australia somewhere 6 months after Grenfell, making jokes about having to work more because of what happened at Grenfell and having to do this stuff. So anyway, so it's just this whole systematic of corruption. These guys knew what they were doing. You know, Kingspan performed like a mafia. They bullied people who questioned them, threatened them with legal action. They've even threatened me with legal action for just saying the things I'm saying right now. And this is just how it is. And another interesting thing, I'll just mention this. I think between 2018 and 2019, Kingspan met with the government between 33 and 36 times. What were you guys meeting about in a year? Kingspan, we then later learned, hired a PR company to go against our campaign to ban combustible materials.
I don't think there's anyone here who's surprised about that.
But for me, but Bex, that...
No, it's an important thing to say, but that is how they operate.
I mean, when I learned that, I almost didn't believe it. I was like, really?
And did they meet with the community? So they were meeting with the government quite a lot, but did they meet with the community?
They never met with the community. They never met with any of the other the people that then now have problems because of being in homes with their insulation on it.
Really significant problems.
So and you got the Cladding Action Group and all of those guys now that have come together to try to, get themselves out of the mess that the government have made, and they've never met with them once. I think they met with Michael Gove a couple of times, but within 1 year, between 2018 and 2019, you're meeting with Kingspan over 30 times. And then you learn things about, lobbying. I mean, my wife is like, she's the one who's fed all of this information to me and taught this, because she does a lot of the research, and she's behind a lot of the brains that goes into some of the stuff that we found out. And you learn about these lobbying groups that are wined and dined in the House of Lords once every year. You have Arconic and Kingspan going to the House of Lords, being wined and dined with lords and ladies, or whatever they call themselves. And then we wonder why we don't have justice. It's because they're in the pockets of these guys. They're all having dinner in their own little social club. They're like, yeah, let them fight amongst themselves and let them believe that they're going to get any justice. And we'll just keep feeding you with meetings and put together a public inquiry. Now, I don't know if you've seen, there's this meme that's going around, is whenever a disaster happens and the government scrambling around, what do we do? I know, a public inquiry. And everyone shouts, yes! Because they know, look at the history of public inquiries in this country. What has happened? We've had some real vital, meaty stuff, like small wins and easy, low-hanging fruits, or whatever the terminology is, for the government to put back some type of confidence. But at every single stage, they've done the complete opposite of what they promised.
It's great to hear you speak. I'd love you to say a little bit about the public inquiry for people here, like what stage is it at? What have you felt about it? Okay, so the public inquiry is now over. The last, or the second phase report is due to come out in September. It was initially supposed to come out in June this year. It's been a long process. I don't know how long it's been in total, but it's been a few years now. A lot of money has been spent, a lot of time and effort. I, in the beginning, didn't really have that much confidence in the public inquiry, but later on, and obviously, being part of it and seeing what's come out, I think they've done a really, really good job. I think the picture's been painted. We know how, we know why, and we know who was involved to a certain extent, and we know who should be to blame. And we're now waiting for their final report, and the phase 2 focuses more on the corporations, more on how we got to the stage of the materials being on the building, the refurbishment, etc. Phase 1 was more about the night, and after phase 1 report came out, which was probably about 2 years ago now, maybe even more,
The government promised that every single recommendation was going to be implemented, and to this day, none of which has happened. And to come back to your point, PEEPS, which is a very important campaign that some of the bereaved family members have put together, personal evacuation plans for some of the elderly and vulnerable people. And to this day, the government have not agreed to have one. You know, it's crazy. I think it was supposed to be mentioned in the King's speech. It might have. I didn't watch it. I'm sorry if I'm wrong, but I mean, 7 years and you've not wanted to put a plan for elderly, disabled people who live in high-rise buildings when a fire happens after Grenfell. It says a lot, you know.
It does. If you were starting from the point of the individuals and the community and human protection, that would be one of the first things that you would do.
Absolutely, and it's you know, there's not that much that's involved, but they just I don't know. You know, I'm still learning. You know, through all of these experiences, Bex, and I still don't understand why something so simple that wouldn't take so much, that can save so many people's lives. They just don't care. They just don't bother. But we'll spend millions on something like the public inquiry. Okay, as great as it has been for us, but it means nothing if nothing happens after it, you know, and the police won't do anything until that's over. So we have to wait for the public inquiry to come out, and the police won't send anything to the CPS until they've read that report and their findings don't cross-reference with their findings, you know. So it's a long process. I mean, this year and next year is going to be a massive year for us. The report's coming out. We can then start putting pressure on the Metropolitan Police, but in the right way. You have to do it in the right way. You can't just put pressure on them and saying, go and arrest this person, because that can also have a negative impact on charges. So we want to do things in the right way. We've been very critical about that in terms of all of the campaigns that we've done. And it just feels like we're at a point now where we've done all the campaigns we can. You know, there are some great people that are continuing the fight. You know, you've got Quadro, who's doing the social housing stuff, the cladding action groups that are doing that. And then we'll still continue in pushing, you know, social housing white paper and stuff like that. But ultimately, for us, it's all about justice. And next year, this year and next year is going to be a good place for us to be able to put some pressure on the police.
I just want to check that there's no hands for questions. Yeah, it's really interesting. You talked about Hillsborough, and you know, for a lot of us who followed that story, it was kind of extraordinary how people were treated in the kind of face of this crisis, and also how long it took to get any sort of truth and reconciliation, let alone any changes.
Thank you both. Firstly, I think it's very applicable what you say to climate and many social justice movements. And I've got kind of 3 questions, but they're kind of interweaved.
That's fine. Yeah, we've got
basically.
A bit of time. You're okay.
So the first one is, how do you manage ego and power dynamics when forming a group identity in a time of such bereavement, and when there's such strong emotional element? How do you manage the kind of just the human frailties and egos and power dynamics that happen there? And then secondly, how do you sustain that group identity? As you said, 7 years on, and also in the face of other competing causes and identities like, as you say, Palestine, which very much resonates with me in how to balance these different injustices. And then thirdly, how do you balance the care for that cause and that group identity with normal life and kind of family time and the other aspects of life? So
yeah, it's brilliant.
Sure, that's great, really good question, and it's made me sort of think about a lot of stuff. I mean, balance was really tough for me. My way of dealing with what happened, I submerged myself into Grenfell. That was how I dealt with it. That was how I was able to cope with what was happening. And it was only until, I guess, the past couple of years when things haven't been as crazy as they have been, everything starts hitting you. Sadly, we lost, a couple more members of my family since then as well, which was tough. So it's only now, 7 years on, am I really starting to reflect, feel, these type of emotions. I've been so busy and using adrenaline. And the thing about ego in the group, I think we had like a similar question in Glastonbury actually, and I remember the answer came to me straight away, because I guess we're quite lucky because we're all so different. So Grenfell United consists of 12 committee members. You have a chair and a vice chair, and they're all survivors and bereaved, and some are survivors and bereaved, and everyone sort of takes or leads in their own role. So it's like we just interlink so well together, Natasha, who's our chair, was one of the last people to be rescued. She also lost her uncle. She's been the chair since I've been the vice chair. She's strong, powerful, smart woman. And we have other people that are just great at, we have leads on the NHS. We have leads when it comes to media. We have leads when it comes to corporation, leads when it comes to social housing. And everyone falls into their roles naturally. And that's what sort of made us have the consistency that we've had. Because it hasn't changed really. The committee have stayed the same. The group has stayed the same. And we all have the same agenda. We all came with the same cause, with the same heart. There are other groups that are similar, like for example, Justice for Grenfell. And they are not survivors and they are not bereaved. They're people from the community. I mean, I'm not sure if they exist so much as they did before, but we met up and was like, look, we want the same things. We're trying to get to the same destination. You're just in a different train to us, We're doing things this way, you're doing things that way. It's great, it helps each other. So and that's fine. It's about recognizing it. But then, there is other things that we spent a lot of time having to fight rumors and speculations and, all sorts of wild accusations. And that took a lot out of us. And I wish we didn't have. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to really sort of choose my words carefully because I don't like to talk about it so much, and some of it did come from, the last places you'd think it would come from. So I expect to be, attacked by corporations or any of these people that we're naming in public. I don't expect it from people that I'm rubbing shoulders with necessarily, but that happens, And one thing we learned from Hillsborough, when we met the families very early on, and they said to us, and this was our biggest lesson, it took us 25 years to come together as one voice. Don't do that. And that's why we were really sort of conscious and really wanted to have this one voice where there were so many different faces, but we were all saying the same thing. The bereaved, the survivors, the community, all together as one. And you see, Margaret Aspinall, and you can see the 30-odd years of activism and fighting in her, and it scared me. I don't have it in me to do that, but I'll do it for as long as it takes, I guess. It's easy to walk away. It's easy to sort of go back into your bubble, but when you have that fire in your heart and when you've experienced something and when you've had your family members, murdered live on TV for the world to watch, they want us to go away. They want us to be quiet. But I hope I'm answering your question. But I think one of the biggest things I would say is that with our group, everything just fell really naturally. And I know that the other groups have not had that, and there are problems with agendas and egos and stuff like that. But for us, we all wanted the same thing, and that's why it's worked out the way it has. And I'm not saying we're some type of successful, it's just everything we've done. We've done it, coming from the right place in our hearts, wanting to bring about change and wanting to bring about justice and it's all voluntarily. Everyone who does it and has sacrificed the time. I mean, my wife and my daughter are here today. They'll tell you probably a good 4 or 5 years of the past 7. They barely. I wasn't there. Even when I was there, I wasn't there. And I'm only starting now to. So it's tough. You have to have that balance.
I just want to check there isn't another question. Yeah, Phil, please. Could we just wait for the mic? Thanks.
I've got a more general question about the stuff about the response of strategic authorities that you were talking about, and about Rebecca Solnit's book. Do you think that, I can imagine various motives on the part of the state or the authorities to, rather than come in and help people sort things out, come in and just squash what's happening. And one could be, just wanting to cover up if they've got
Yeah.
responsibility, we just don't want anyone to kind of discover how implicated we are, or like you say, maybe fear of civil unrest. And another one I can think of is, I remember Hurricane Katrina. Very early on, there was basically, I suppose, a kind of a flawed conception of how people tend to behave in that situation, which seems to be somehow really, really, really embedded in popular consciousness. So, it's the same with COVID, or well, maybe not with COVID, but there's always this kind of perception, in a disaster, the first thing you need is a gun because everyone's going to come for your stockpile of, whatever it is. And it turns out in most disasters, what actually happens is, as you said, the opposite. People come together and are incredibly cooperative. So, I mean, what are the kind of the drivers of the flaws in the way the authorities respond to it? Is it about a misunderstanding about human beings, or is it?
Well, I think it's an excellent question. I think it's a really, really good question. And what I'd like to do, slightly unconventionally, is I'd like to start at the other end of the question. So what I've come across recently is some really, really sophisticated work going on in Wellington in New Zealand. And New Zealand is a place that has a lot of natural disasters. And the area of Wellington, and I think it's the regional council that are doing this, are doing some really brilliant work with local communities. They're a strategic body and they have funding. And what they do is they turn up in a community that they think are likely to experience an emergency, and they hold a party. This is basically how it works. This is all online, and I've listened to the people who organise this talk about it, and it's brilliant. They organise a party, they invite people to the party, and then they ask them to talk about their area, and they reflect that back in a word cloud. And so people can see all the different bits of the area, and it'll be things like where the parks are, or it'll be like we've got really good resources in this area, or the schools are really good, or whatever it might be. Huge kind of sense of what the community is. And then they kind of do an enactment of a disaster. And the people who've turned up at this party have had their party, and then it's like, right, we're going to kind of enact a disaster. And what happens is that the groups within the community initially are kind of like, well, we don't know what to do. What would you have us do? And the strategic people say, no, we won't be able to get to you in time. So this is what this is about. And what happens is the people organise themselves over time, and then they repeat this exercise immediately, so that the people go away with a sense of how much they've learnt from the first exercise. And then they are left with a box. And in the box is a plan from all the stuff that they've identified about the community, where the resources are, where the spaces are, that kind of thing, and a load of lanyards. And the lanyards have just got roles on them. It doesn't say who's going to be doing the roles. It just says these are probably the roles you're going to be needing, and these are the 5 areas you're going to need to pay attention to. Now, when this is described by the people who've organised it, and these are people with resources, they're like a local authority, it's very moving, because what the guy says is the first time that they had a disaster in an area that they had prepared in this way, he said it was as smooth as butter. And the only thing that they had to do as the strategic body was to ring up and ask what was needed. That was it. They just rang up, and at the other end of the phone, there'd be people saying, this is what we need. And so the local authority become this agency of providing resourcing. They're not micromanaging. They don't need to determine how things are going to run, because that's self-organising. So we are capable of doing this. This can be done. In answer to your question properly, thank you. In answering your question, or the spirit of your question, I think there are loads of things that go on, and Rebecca Solnit talks about this. There's a fear of implication where there has been wrongdoing, which clearly there was in the Kensington case. So there's a kind of embarrassment and a need to manage the story. And there's the kind of micromanaging fear of needing to have a role in a disaster. So, I'm notionally in charge, therefore I must be doing something. And so it's not that it's a very difficult thing to turn up in a community and say, what can I do to help? If you've got a strategic role, presumably you turn up and you kind of think, I'm supposed to be running this, and they're all doing stuff by themselves. This is a nightmare, So I think there's loads of things like that. And then there's the pretty dark stuff that Karim's talking about, where, they just perceive particular communities as problematic. And in this case, we know across the whole of the UK, there's a lot of Islamophobia. It's a kind of mainstream idea, isn't it? So I think a lot of that is going on. But I just want to draw you back to this example in New Zealand, in Wellington. We can do it another way. This is not difficult. We just have to have a lot of confidence in people. And I would argue we need to learn to manage conflict over time. So we're really good at this at the beginning, and then it becomes more difficult. And I think that is when the help is needed, in my view. Is there anything you want to add into that?
No, I mean, I think that's really interesting, what the guys are doing in New Zealand. And I think if we did more of that, and I think just basic things, and we were talking about some of this stuff when we first met at the round table, and it was really interesting, even just, I never thought about it before, and just thinking about it now, just recognising where resources are, where vulnerable people are, whose role, simple things like having radios and all of this type of stuff. It's important, and for me, obviously, I experienced it in a different way, but there's so many similarities, in terms of, right, these people lost their homes, these are the places that have access to beds and clothes and stuff like that. Let's get them here, let's get them there. So, and, I think that's one of the most powerful things we as people, I mean, that's one of my ideas moving forward for campaigns. And I'll just say this really, really quickly. People say, okay, what's next? What can we do next? Is when you look at the history of all of these disasters and how people have been treated by the state, local authorities, the powers that be, whoever you want to call them, there are so many similarities. Hillsborough, Windrush, Post Office, Grenfell, so many similarities, even though there's, that their experiences are different, but the similarities in terms of how they've been treated and looked after are almost identical. So for me, the thing that I believe scares them the most is coming together, uniting all of these fights, and that can be one of the most powerful things. Get everyone together, and unite as one voice, or come up with a campaign together, and that's one thing they like to keep us compartmentalized. They want us to keep. Well, that's the Hillsborough voices. That's the Grenfell. We can manage them quite easily. They can't manage us all together.
I think it's an absolutely brilliant place to end. Okay, so there's a few things, before we thank Karim properly, there's a few things I wanted you to know. So Karim and his family have driven down to be with us today in this terrible heat, and they've got loads of stuff going on. So we're really grateful that you've come. Thank you so much.
I'm so grateful. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Really great. And I want to acknowledge that we're making you talk about a really difficult period in your lives, and I'm really grateful that you're prepared to do that. Let's have a massive round of applause for Karim and his family.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And for Bex as well, everybody as well. Thank you.